That's at 10:50 after an extended 10 o'clock news now with Huw Edwards in Downing Street and Fiona Bruce. This is BBC One.
Hand on heart, I did what I thought was right. I may have been wrong. That's your call. But believe one thing, if nothing else. I did what I thought was right for our country.
The end of an era. Tony Blair defends his decade in power as he announces he's stepping down as Prime Minister. He said 10 years at number 10 was long enough for him and for the country.
This is the greatest nation on earth. So it has been an honour to serve it.
After the euphoria of 1997, we'll be asking, did Tony Blair deliver on his promises? We'll be looking at the questions that will not go away over the war in Iraq. And the new, more informal style of leadership that Mr. Blair ushered in.
Look at my face.
Right, what are you doing?
Is my face bothered?
No, wait a minute.
Does my face look bothered though?
No, are you messing with my mind?
Face bothered. Top shop, centre parts, trainers, small feet, rich tea, bandages, Ryan, Lees. I ain't bothered.
In other news, another hike in interest rates. They're at their highest level in 6 years. And the pain is unending for the parents of Madeleine McCann. Tonight, police in Portugal say they're studying CCTV footage.
In BBC London News, it's where he spent his career and the place he'll continue to live. But what has Blair done for London? And red faces at Wembley as thousands of seats need to be replaced.
Very good evening from Downing Street for a special edition of the 10 o'clock news on the day Tony Blair announced his resignation as Labour leader and Prime Minister. He informed the Cabinet here at number 10 this morning and then travelled to Sedgefield to share the news with his constituents. He told them that, hand on heart, he'd always done what he thought was the right thing for the country. Mr. Blair's last day in office will be June the 27th. Tonight, we'll have all the reaction and we'll be examining the Blair legacy after a decade in power. Evan Davis will ask whether things really have got better since 1997. John Simpson in Baghdad will discuss Blair and the war in Iraq. And Gavin Hewitt will explore how Britain has changed over 10 years. But first tonight, our political editor Nick Robinson reports on the last act in the Blair premiership.
You've never seen a goodbye quite like this one. It came today with a kiss, a wave, and a plea to be understood. A new dawn is how Tony Blair hailed his victory 10 years ago. He began this day aware that for many, the Blair decade hasn't lived up to that billing. Having told his cabinet the news, he jetted off to his lucky place, the place where he's greeted each of his 3 election victories, the place where he knows he's guaranteed a hero's welcome. They've never doubted him here, but today they were just a backdrop for a carefully scripted farewell to a watching nation.
Today I announce my decision to stand down from the leadership of the Labour Party. The party will now select a new leader. On the 27th of June, I will tender my resignation from the office of Prime Minister to the Queen. I've been Prime Minister of this country for just over 10 years. In this job, in the world of today, I think that's long enough for me, but more especially for the country.
Expectations, he said, had simply been too high for what he could achieve in that time. But
think back. No, really, think back. Think about your own living standards then in May 1997 and now. Visit your local school, any of them round here or anywhere in modern Britain. Ask when you last had to wait a year or more on a hospital waiting list or heard of pensioners freezing to death in the winter unable to heat their homes.
this, though, was not to be a list of achievements. Tony Blair wanted approval not for his policies but for his character, for the way he had governed.
Your duty as Prime Minister is to act according to your conviction. And all of that can get contorted so that people think that you act according to some messianic zeal.
Outside, a reminder of what hung over this whole event. One word, one judgment, one horrible mess. Iraq.
I decided we should stand shoulder to shoulder with our oldest ally. And I did so out of belief. And removing Saddam and his sons from power, as with removing the Taliban, was over with relative ease. But the blowback since, from global terrorism and those elements that support it, has been fierce and unrelenting and costly.
That the closest he's come to accepting a link so often denied between the war and increased terror.
But I ask you to accept one thing. Hand on heart, I did what I thought was right. I may...
This was not an apology. It was, though, an appeal to the millions who at first backed the war and then later felt betrayed.
I may have been wrong. That's your call. But believe one thing, if nothing else. I did what I thought was right for our country.
We were watching a man writing his own political epitaph with a crack in his voice and a tear in his eye.
I give my thanks to you, the British people, for the times that I've succeeded, and my apologies to you for the times I've fallen short. But good luck.
And that is that. Or rather, it isn't. He said farewell last October. He said it today. He won't actually be gone for another 7 weeks. Not long for Gordon Brown to wait. In the Commons, he showed what was on his mind.
There are, of course, 600,000 vacancies in the economy as a result of there's one more today, actually, as a result of announcements that have just been made. But the shadow...
They got the gag. The Speaker got a little ahead of himself.
I must say gently to the Prime Minister...
Not yet. Not yet. For this was Tony Blair's day. It could have been no one else's.
No Prime Minister has done what Tony Blair did today. Announced they're leaving office after a decade on a date of their own choosing and with a smile and a wave. It is quite some achievement.
There were, of course, others, and what today was really about was inviting people to remember the days of political sunshine and to forgive the storms that have marred the final days and months of this Prime Minister's long journey in power.
Well, let's talk to Nick Robinson now, who's in Sedgefield tonight. Nick, you mentioned there what you thought Mr. Blair was trying to achieve with that statement. Will it work?
Well, it was a quite extraordinary performance, wasn't it, Huw? And there is the rub, because that is a double-edged word. Some, yes, will see this tonight as closer to a confession, closer to an apology than they've ever seen before, not just from Tony Blair, but from any leading politician, and they may well welcome it. Others, though, may see it as too scripted, too neat, not quite an apology, just another of those daytime TV confessions. And that will be the key. We can't decide. People at home will decide tonight. What we do know is that no one else would dare do that. Few politicians would dare. Few politicians, of course, are like Tony Blair.
Let's ask as well, Nick, how the content of that statement and the style might impact on the kind of debate we're going to see in the leadership election in the next few weeks.
Well, we'll see the launch of that leadership campaign by the man almost certain to win it, if there ever is a contest, Gordon Brown, tomorrow. We're told that he'll be professional, he'll be serious, he'll be statesmanlike. They know he can do nothing like today. Frankly, those around him probably don't want him to. This, for example, was his tribute paid today to Tony Blair's 10 years in office.
I think I spoke for millions of people when I said at the Cabinet today that Tony Blair's achievements are unique, unprecedented and enduring. Many people will remember how he led the country after July the 7th, how he responded for the whole world after September the 11th in America, how he responded to the tragic death of Princess Diana. But over 10 years, his enduring legacy will also be that he built better public services, a strong economy, that Britain's reputation in the world is stronger than ever before, At all times, he tried to do the right thing.
What an intriguing way to end. He always tried to do his best. We'll see the difference with Gordon Brown. One straw in the wind, an interview with the American magazine Time. Asked about his meeting with President Bush recently, Gordon Brown goes on to praise not the president, but the fact that he has good working relationships with both main parties in America. Nothing will be like today. Gordon Brown will certainly not be like Tony Blair. Is that a cause for a sigh of relief or a shed a tear? You decide.
Nick, thank you very much. Nick Robinson, our political editor in Mr Blair's constituency in Sedgefield tonight. Well, today's announcement marks the end of an unprecedented period in British politics. Tony Blair is, of course, the first Labour leader to have won 3 consecutive elections, and he's presided over the longest-lasting Labour government in history. Mr Blair, as we saw, spoke at length today about Britain's healthy economic growth and rising living standards, and Labour's introduction of the minimum wage, the granting of independence to the Bank of England, and record spending on health and education. So, here's the BBC's economics editor, Evan Davis, with his assessment of whether things really did get better under Blair.
Barely an hour in office, and Tony Blair already has his first economic problem, living up to his promise to make things better.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
And next day, a quick trip to a difficult South London housing estate. More high hopes. So, did things get better under Blair? Well, on the same estate today, it's just not easy to call.
I really felt when he came along and promised all these things that things would really dramatically change on this estate. And I think everybody felt the same way. And unfortunately, I don't feel it has.
But there are now plans to demolish and upgrade this estate. As it happens, there's less child poverty in Britain than 10 years ago, but the country is not more equal and it's not more socially mobile. Yet in the economy generally, Britain has prospered. A decade of cheap Chinese imports and an unanticipated immigration wave added up to strong growth and low inflation. Under Tony Blair, national income per person grew at an average rate of 2.4% a year. The post-war average has been 2.1%. For the city, chief executives and celebrities, Britain's business services-oriented economy has worked well, even if that wasn't Mr Blair's original priority.
Ask me my 3 main priorities for government, and I tell you, education, education, and education.
The Prime Minister liked to repeat his big promise. Schools got stately visits and a big dose of extra money. If it was surprisingly easy to deliver a good economy, it's been surprisingly difficult to deliver better public services. This primary school, which the Prime Minister visited in '97, says things have got better. The results are up, the resourcing's improved. But in schools across the country, getting small achievements has cost a lot and been controversial. But the money did go in. Britain's schools are now better equipped than in most of the developed world. So when did the laptops come?
I think they came in when we was in year 5, and they've been really helpful.
And there has been small progress on class sizes. Under Tony Blair, average primary school class sizes in England have fallen from 27.5 to 26.3. Secondary school class sizes have barely changed. But then there's the other great public service, the NHS.
At the end of that 5 years, we will be in a position where our health service spending comes up to the average of the European Union. It's too low at the moment.
They delivered on that spending, and what Tony Blair will be remembered for is new hospital buildings. In Leeds, for example, Jimmy's is getting a huge new cancer centre. It is hard to generalise about the NHS. People have such very, very different experiences. But the statistical studies do suggest it is significantly better, but probably marginally less efficient. In other words, we're getting more for our extra money, but not quite as much more as we might have hoped. As Mr. Blair perhaps discovered more than once.
And you had a terrible evening. We've had a very distressful 24 hours. So what are you going to do? It should not be down to individuals like us campaigning to get donors on registries. It is not good enough. Your government needs to do the campaigning.
We met up with Carol Maddox. Her daughter Alice was coping and she was happy with the PM.
After question time, he did listen, and he were interested not only in the effect that Alice's illness had on her, but what it had on the whole family.
But I didn't expect this when I asked about the NHS generally.
Recently, my dad died in our local hospital, and the care was atrocious. You know, my dad died from MRSA, and he should never have died.
Looking back on the whole 10 years, can you sum up Mr. Blair's record? I suppose you'd say the story of Tony Blair's government is that it used a relatively strong economy to allow the spending power of private citizens to grow comfortably while channeling loads of extra resources at health and education, only some of which it wasted. It may not meet the high expectations people had, but yes, things did get better. Evan Davis, BBC News.
Well, within minutes of Mr. Blair's announcement today, allies and opponents started debating the entire record. Some said that they lamented his failure to forge closer links with Europe and to take Britain into the euro. But others pointed to this week's events, for example, in Northern Ireland, and said that lasting peace there would be seen as his greatest achievement. Most controversial of all, of course, has been the Prime Minister's readiness to use military force abroad when he's judged it to be the only option. Back in 1997, at his first NATO summit, he had held out a very different prospect.
Mine is the first generation able to contemplate the possibility that we may live our entire lives without going to war or sending our children to war. That is a prize beyond value.
But just a year after Mr. Blair expressed that particular hope, he sent British forces into battle with a bombing campaign, Operation Desert Fox, to enforce a no-fly zone in southern Iraq. 4 months later, with the broad backing of the British people, the RAF was in action again, bombing Serbia to force the troops of Slobodan Milosevic out of Kosovo. In May 2000, British forces were sent into Sierra Leone to overturn an attempted coup there. The following year, 2001, brought the attacks of 9/11. After which British and US forces overthrew the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. British troops are still there today. But it was Mr. Blair's decision to invade Iraq with the Americans that provoked the deepest controversy. Here's our World Affairs editor, John Simpson.
This is Baghdad, the grandiose monument that Saddam Hussein erected to himself and his greatness. Did Tony Blair really believe in the rightness of the cause of overthrowing Saddam, or did he merely think that it was in Britain's political interest to keep as close to the United States as possible, regardless of whether it was right or wrong? Well, Tony Blair is a conviction politician. That's his stock in trade. He needs to believe in the rightness of what he says.
The entire direction of Tony Blair's premiership was changed by the events of the 11th of September 2001. They gave him a new and completely different cause to follow.
The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
Tony Blair had helped the previous American administration reorder the world, and it had worked well, both for Britain and for Blair. But George W. Bush was a very different American president. What, someone asked, did they have in common? Books, ideals, religious experience?
Well, we both use Colgate toothpaste. They're going to wonder how you know that, George.
But President Bush was planning to demonstrate America's undiminished power by taking out Saddam Hussein, an apparently difficult but actually very easy target. Tony Blair went along with it, hoping to win wider backing. But that meant playing up the intelligence information.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons,
that Saddam has continued to produce them, that he has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes, including against his own Shia population.
Not a single part of this turned out to be true. Large numbers of people doubted it at the time, and 1 million people marched in London.
Neither the international community nor the British public is persuaded that there is an urgent and compelling reason for this military action in Iraq.
Still, Tony Blair went through with it. Saddam's overthrow was predictably quick and easy. Tony Blair felt sure some WMDs would be found. They weren't, and his reputation has been tarnished permanently. Not though among his American friends.
Prime Minister Blair has had an enormous impact on world politics, and he certainly has had an enormous impact on the special relationship between the United States and Great Britain. He has been a friend, he has been steadfast in the face of negative public opinion, in the face of crises. He stood steady, and we could always count on him. Some people say, well, you shouldn't always be able to count on him. But he came to his own conclusions, he made his own judgments.
The problem was that the enterprise in Iraq, ill thought out and badly planned, went so wrong. The insurgency grew stronger and stronger. Democratic elections, the centerpiece of the American and British plan, were a success, yet their real result was to accentuate the divisions in a badly divided society. Hundreds of thousands have died, not just blown up or shot, but often tortured to death in sectarian violence in unimaginably dreadful ways. Perhaps Tony Blair's basic problem, though, was that he remained so close to a man as deeply unpopular in Britain as George W. Bush was.
Prime Minister Blair is a visionary leader. I've come to know him as a man of unshakable convictions.
If he'd kept his distance more, his own people might have judged him less harshly.
When people look back on this time and look back on this conflict, I honestly believe they will see this as one of the defining moments of our century.
Maybe, but probably not in the way Tony Blair would like. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
The legacy overseas. Well, Tony Blair said today that Britain had changed profoundly in the past decade. Society was now more confident, he said, more tolerant, more open-minded. And he wondered whether Britain would have won the bid to host the Olympic Games in 2012 if that social transformation hadn't happened. Gavin Hewitt assesses how Britain has changed in the Blair years.
Tony Blair revelled in being new. A leader with energy. He paraded a different style.
Hi.
Modern, relaxed, at ease.
Look at my face.
Right, what are you doing?
Is my face poppy?
In his early days in Downing Street, stars like Noel Gallagher were invited into number 10. Britain was to be rebranded Cool Britannia. When Princess Diana died, the new Prime Minister found the words, the tone of a less formal Britain.
They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess.
So what did the Blair years change? Britain became more liberal. Tolerance was in. There were civil partnerships for gay couples. Licensing hours relaxed. Cannabis was reclassified.
I don't think Blair caused the new atmosphere of toleration and modernity in Britain. I think he simply noticed it. He was the first politician of his generation to notice it, and he reflected it. He went with it. He didn't try to fight it as the Tories did.
But there were big fears, most notably over immigration. It has brought big changes to the British way of life. The Blair years have not settled the debate about immigration. It tops people's fears about where Britain is heading.
Then there's the multicultural society. No one now seriously questions that multicultural Britain is here to stay.
But the Blair era is ending with deep unease. How to integrate, particularly parts of the Muslim community, into modern Britain. After the bombings of 7/7, Britain seems less secure. The intelligence services are said to be investigating 30 active plots. As Tony Blair prepares to leave office, the government finds itself walking a fine line between cracking down on extremism and weakening civil liberties. But some things didn't change, the public's view of politicians.
We are pure and pure, that people understand that we will not have any truck with anything that is improper in any shape or form at all.
But the doubts started early. There were suspicious donations from men like the Formula One impresario Bernie Ecclestone. The country learnt about spin doctors and spinning. Close allies like Peter Mandelson were found to be less than open about their financial affairs. Later, Tony Blair's inner circle was at the centre of allegations that honours were traded for donations. As the Blair era ends, polls indicate there is a widespread belief that politicians are untrustworthy.
I think there's far less spin from Tony Blair himself and hardly any sleaze at all from Tony Blair himself. And somehow he's blundered into things that made it look as if he was, dare I say it, corrupt. I'm sure he isn't, but he has that reputation now. It's a tragedy for him and a tragedy for the party.
Perhaps the best tribute to Tony Blair's legacy is that there are parts of it the Tories accept, that public services are valued, and that the public wants a tolerant, inclusive society.
But all the things that you've seen slowly fade away.
Tony Blair would argue that he has left Britain more affluent, more at ease with itself. For all that, there is widespread cynicism about politicians and their promises, and where Britain is heading. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
Well, throughout the day, Mr Blair's allies have been paying tribute to his leadership, as you'd expect, but so far we've not heard from one of the main architects of New Labour, who was there among the crowd celebrating on London's South Bank in the early hours of May the 2nd, 10 years ago. They're celebrating with Mr Kinnock and Mr Prescott, and he is, of course, Peter Mandelson, the European Commissioner and the former Cabinet Minister. Thanks for joining us on this rainy evening. Mr Blair today very open about the fact that he thought expectations had been raised to unrealistic levels 10 years ago. Would you go along with that?
I don't think we realised quite how high expectations were in 1997, but if you think back to that time, we were a country economically rather insecure, ill at ease with ourselves. Many people had lost faith in the ability of our schools and hospitals to deliver, and frankly we'd lost influence in Europe and the world. So people did expect a lot from us. I think over the decade as a whole we've delivered, but I think in a sense we got off to a rather slow start.
Is Iraq still today overshadowing all the achievements that you would like to list?
I don't think so. I think not for people in the country who perhaps don't obsess quite as much about Iraq as some do. I think what has touched people's lives and improved people's lives above all is the turnaround in our schools and hospitals. Just remember, in those days, people could see what was going wrong, but they were also being told that as taxpayers, they wouldn't stump up the cash to increase the investment and to raise the standards. Well, what a turnaround we see now. People are prepared to pay for public services because they know much better and more clearly what they're going to get back. And I think their high expectations still will drive up standards further.
Let's talk about the party's future briefly, if we may. Mr Brown obviously expecting to be the next leader. Do you support him as a candidate, and will you support his leadership? And do you think he will do the right thing for Labour?
Well, as Britain's European Commissioner, I shall certainly work very closely, I hope, with Prime Minister Brown, as I expect him to be, and as an ordinary Labour Party member. He will have my loyalty and that of all those who are closest to Mr Blair. What we would like to see is that just as New Labour has been Mr Blair's legacy, we would like New Labour to be Mr Brown's legacy as well, and I confidently believe that that will be the case.
We shall see. Peter Mandelson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Peter Mandelson there. That's it from Downing Street for now. We'll be back a little later, so let's join Fiona for the day's